By the time you're watching this video, it's very likely that Tekken 8 Season 2 has been released. If you're here earlier than that, I hope the wait isn't too brutal. It's time for me to finally make a tier list. Why am I doing it now? Well, if I want to make content describing which characters have gotten stronger and weaker, we need some kind of reference point to start from. So, quite literally at the last minute, I've decided to finally express my opinion on these characters. Part of it also is that I haven't really had a really solid opinion without getting the chance to play every character, play against every character's specialists, and see them perform in tournament. I still don't have all that experience, but again, we have to place them somewhere. A few disclaimers: tier lists are always a matter of opinion, no matter how objective we try to be. They're heavily influenced by, say, our own characters' bad matchups or particular strong players in our region. So what I'm going to do is create a tier list based on these criteria, and then I'll compare them against some other pro players' tier lists so you can get a bit of a balanced perspective. Obviously, it'll be a bit too late to pick your character based on this tier list, but when Season 2 comes, we'll be able to make some more informed decisions based on how characters have been strengthened and weakened. Okay, disclaimers are out of the way. Let's get started. So this tier list is a 1st to 2 tier list, basically focused on ranked and tournament settings, outside of like the grand finals and stuff like that. It's an attempt to be ordered. So again, this gets more difficult the lower you go in the tier list, I think, where character strengths and weaknesses start to get really fuzzy in terms of which outshines the other. Finally, because the power levels in this game are very, very close, I consider every character between S to like A-, if not B tier. Because the power levels are very close, we're going to separate them more by matchup spread and ease of use. I think objective power level is going to get more difficult to judge as we get lower. So this is how we're going to do it. And finally, instead of using S, A, B, C, I sort it by top amount. So top 5, top 15, top 28. The reason why the top 28 and top 36 are a bit weirder numbers is because I wanted to still vaguely group them by power level. Again, preferring an ordered approach. So let's actually start from the bottom, because I think this is where there's a lot of contention unless you are a matchup specialist. And for the bottom tiers, this is no disrespect to them. I'm just going to lay them out all at once. We have Jack, Deviljin, Raven. I think that Jack and Deviljin stand out among the bottom tiers as having good explosiveness and still being wielded well by character experts. For Jack in America, we obviously have Anakin, Joey Fury, and Joe Crush. Deviljin has a ton of experts, especially in Europe, and seeing the way that they optimize this character, to me, makes him pretty scary. Even though he's so volatile and inconsistent that it's hard to perform with him consistently in tournaments and in ranked, I think he's so explosive and he can be really deadly. Having a launching hell sweep and a complementary launching mid is always going to be very strong, even if it is high risk for him. Also, he has an electric and demon paw. Those are always going to be good. I've put Lars in 4th for a similar reason. I think that we've seen players like Kaizoku Lars do really well in Europe and in the world stage, but they obviously have consistency problems. Lars has the ability to rob you and force mix-ups, which work in his favor. But aside from that, he just doesn't apply as much pressure in unfair situations as other characters do. For the same reason, I think Leo is actually really strong, and Azucena. But I don't think they're often putting you in unfair situations over and over. Leroy and Panda, these are up for debate. Some people rate Panda much higher because they're basically Kuma without a different heat state. And Leroy, famously in Korea, is rated much more highly. I can only imagine because of Breadman, a Leroy specialist. In America, we don't have as many Leroy specialists. We have Cyrax Slayer, who's in tournaments a lot, but it's hard for me to gauge the strength of Leroy personally, so currently this is the order I have it in. Again, the power levels are very close. Do not take the bottom tier too seriously. You are still, like, Joe Crush is winning so many tournaments, right, with the bottom tier character. So I would not take the bottom tier as a reason to not pick a character. Okay, let's move to the top 5, because I basically, spoiler, I think top 28 is going to be the most interesting portion of this list. So let's go to top 5. This is hard to be very decisive about, but I would say that Nina and Yoshimitsu, to me, take the top 2. I think Nina has so much offensive flexibility. She has tons of counter hit launchers. She has one of the best power crushes in the game with Blonde Bomb. And then she has like a pseudo hell sweep mix-up with Wipe the Floor. Now, obviously, top-level players will tell you Wipe the Floor is reactable. However, we've seen Arslan Ash find a lot of success with it because he fakes the crouch dash so many times. Yoshimitsu, similarly, is a very dominant character in how he forces you to play the game, right? So Yoshimitsu is probably the polar opposite to Nina. Nina having tons of aggressive tools, counter hit tools, ways to control you with her hitboxes, and then capitalizing on your mistakes between those. Yoshimitsu is a character who feels impossible to attack consistently. His down forward 2 is evasive. His up forward 3 hop knee is evasive. His flash breaks the rules of most frame data in the game. So attacking Yoshimitsu is very inconsistent. And in this game, they've made his stances a lot more real as well. So when he's in Dragonfly stance, the helicopter stance, his mix-up is a lot more potent and scary. Not to mention his Okazemi at the wall with the unblockable low sweep. So Yoshimitsu and Nina, I think, sit in the top 2. Again, this isn't fully based on tournament results. I think that in the first year of Tekken 8, we've seen people adjust from their Tekken 7 styles and try to apply a Tekken 8 style. And there's been growing pains. But I think that among most people who play the game at a very high level, if you talk to them and the way they experience these characters, what is reasonable counterplay and what is kind of within your control, these characters are the hardest to deal with. And it's not much different with the rest of the top 5. Jin, Kuma, and Dragunov we've seen consistently at the top level. Not just Rangchu, but Nino and Sour Piggy as well, representing Kuma across the world. Just Frame James, also a Kuma player. Again, this character is just so difficult to fight, not just because of his chip damage, not just because of his heat, but I think the evasion is something that isn't talked about a lot. The bears, naturally, their legs sit back, so it's harder to hit their legs with regular lows in the neutral. And on top of that, tons of the moves have high evasion. And if you're ever wrong, you get launched. And the combo damage they get, especially with their unscaled grounded ender with the booty, you don't get many chances to mess up against the bear. So that's why I have Kuma in top 5. And then I think Jin and Dragunov, Jin players will disagree with you, but I think most people who watch tournaments would agree with this. Jin has been really, really leveled up coming into this game with his new dive kicks. He has a few better panic buttons with Blackwing Rondo, the Zen up 1, which can evade highs, lows, and sub-mids. And he still has his traditional parry. He has one of the best heat smashes in the game, being able to wall splat from huge distances and break wall hazards. And his chip damage game is on par with Kuma's, if not better. The main downplay you'll hear from Jin players is that his lows are reactable, but at the very top level, down 2 is hitting, hell sweep is hitting, and down back 4 is hitting because he has so many more threats to represent. So Jin is very, very good. This is also not to mention that his punishment and poking all got buffed. So Season 2 is going to do a number on him. We're not sure how strong that will be. Dragunov, a menace throughout the season. People have argued that he's gotten weaker, and especially as we fill out the rest of the top 15, you may think Dragunov may not be as scary. But again, this is a tier list that kind of focuses on the hypothetical best players in the situation. And I can only imagine if we were fighting Atif or Ulsan, it would not be fun fighting Dragunov. I will try to acknowledge my bias pretty regularly in this list, and this is where you'll notice it the most, I think. Let's look at the top 15. Feng Wei. This is a controversial character. I think anybody who fights against Feng Wei feels how bad it is, but maybe if you pick up Feng Wei, it's a bit confusing why people are so successful with him. I think that's for a few reasons. I think it's because Feng Wei has so many tools and so many moves to represent that he needs to overwhelm the opponent with how many different things he could do to them. If you ever get stale or predictable, he doesn't get a lot of reward for the risk he takes. Down back 3 is a launch punishable low. The counter hit property is nice, but if that's the only low you're showing, it can be easy for an opponent to duck and get the right punish, and you end up losing all the poke damage you worked for, right? But Feng is undoubtedly very strong. Again, anybody who fights against him knows that if you're a Feng player, it's worth, I think, trying to look at the greats, the Jokas, the Kokomas, and imitate what they're doing on that character and see why their Feng looks so much scarier than yours might look. Next are the slide characters, Law and Shaheen. I could not order these two in a different place. I think Law is marginally better. For the reason being, he has Dragon Hammer, counter hit launch. He has the while standing 4 loops into DSS because they made it way more accessible now. While standing 3 gives him so many plus frames. There's no reasonable counterplay against the stance unless you duck the while standing 3 in the first place. The nunchucks help cover a bunch of his other weaknesses. It can evade jabs. It tracks if you're trying to step his key moves. And this is before you even talk about the slide, which is insanely strong. On top of all of these moves, he has 1-1-1 as a counter hit launching heat dash. That is insane. I think Law is very, very overtuned. He's stylistically very aggressive, which fits the game, and he has tools to deal with most characters, right? If you need to fight, for example, a Clive who tends to shut down your aggression, he has forward 3, the long range power crush. He has 1+2, or back 1+2, I believe. Tons of power crushing options, tons of counter hit heat engaging options, which are heat dash launchers like his back 1-2-2, and then the junkyard wall combo does insane damage. Law is really, really good. And Shaheen, similar differences, I think, is that Shaheen is probably poking you more. However, as soon as he gets into heat state with things like up forward 1 or down back 2-1 whiff punish, or even one of the counter hit confirms a down back 2-1, Shaheen ends up nuking tons of your HP. The guard break mix-up into the heat dash mix-up into sneak stance with the low heat smash. All of these do insane amounts of damage. You don't get many chances to guess wrong against Shaheen in heat. Now, outside of heat, yes, he has to slide. Yes, his while standing 2 is unsafe, severely unsafe, launch punishable. Same with his hop kick being unsafe. Shaheen ends up poking you more, probably sliding a lot more, but that access to the insane heat mix-up is very much in his favor. When you tie in the full crouch low that has the high counter hit launching extension, very difficult to fight against. Okay, now this is going to be a controversial pick as well. I have Bryan in the 9th spot. Knee has shown us, and Lohai and Knee have shown us how strong Bryan can be, but even before that, Bilal from Pakistan was showing how good Bryan can be. This character in this game has had so many of his weaknesses patched over. QCB1 is an egregious move. The fact that he can backsway to sometimes evade highs, it's a counter hit launching high that's plus, that's basically an electric. And when you consider that the counterplay to that move is exposes you to his other key moves, right? You can't really sidewalk reliably against the QCB1 and the QCF 1+2 and hatchet kick, right? The core coverage of his main key tools end up making it very difficult to fight against him. And he's kept his insane counter hit launch nuke potential. He has insane wall carry in this game and his classic unblockable at the wall setups with the taunt. Bryan has been really souped up in this game, even with his traditional weaknesses of bad poking. His 1-2-4 being a heat engage on counter hit, plus the 1-2-1. Plus the range and safety, relative safety of his down 4, Bryan has become insanely difficult to deal with. And don't forget his heat string, his Lidia political storm. Forward 2-1-3, 2-1. I don't know. I start mashing the punch buttons after the 3. That string can fully realign even if you've sidewalked way to his side. He can stop the string at any point and play like a counter hit mix-up. Bryan is very, very good. And especially now that we've seen Knee and Lohai figure out how to pilot him in this game, he's extremely deadly. Okay, as I've said, the power levels are getting really close, so this is where it's going to get really fuzzy. Claudio, tons of tournament success from multiple players, Hafiz Tanvir, Mulgold, throughout the Tekken World Tour season. Me personally, if this were my bad matchups list, Claudio might even go higher. But considering the explosiveness, the unpredictability of these other characters on top, I find Claudio can sit a bit lower. He just realistically isn't representing as many threats as these other characters, which does somewhat make him easier to deal with. Now, Mulgold and Hafiz Tanvir have shown that even with a simple move list, you can go a really long way. But Mulgold in the Korea versus Pakistan exhibition switched to Feng when he felt like he couldn't find openings with Claudio. So I think that Claudio thrives on his unpredictability and explosiveness, his evasion, the strong frame situations he puts you in with running 2, sidestep 4, things like that. But his small move list has somewhat shown up as a bit of a liability. Again, he's still in my list top 10, so not really weak by any means. Alisa is one of the biggest rule breaker characters I can think of. Her backdash and sidestep are very unusual to try to deal with unless you have a character with really egregious moves. Think like Feng, Dragunov, Jin, Nina, Yoshimitsu. And even then, she is a very evasive character. They've also given her better offense. Tons of transitions into chainsaw stance, tons of chip damage that they've had to nerf repeatedly, and she just is basically impossible to hit while doing a bunch of damage to you. And if you mess up, forward 2-1 is a heat dash launcher. Up forward 2, huge homing range 4 chainsaw, heat dash launcher. Very, very difficult character to deal with, even with the knowledge of how to deal with her. She ends up putting you in true rock, paper, scissors, and guess situations. And tiny buffs to things like her down 4 1+2 being a jailing string means that she gets to run a lot more offense on you, play a few more mind games with her strings, and just you have less opportunities to make plays against her than you used to. I think Alisa is really, really strong. Where she falls off, I say, compared to the other top 10 is if you are going small Tekken for small Tekken with her, she struggles to find big cash out reward, whereas Dragunov can still get huge reward, Kuma can still get huge reward, Jin can nuke you at any time. These top, like all these characters can nuke you at any time in the small Tekken game. Alisa can too, but she's probably looking more for a whiff into a hop kick, right? She's not really exploding you on a counter hit outside of like up forward 2 maybe on your approach. But I think Alisa is one of my menaces. On my own like personal matchup list, she probably shoots way higher because I think Steve and Lili have a hard time fighting her. All right, next, this is definitely a bit of NA bias at play. Peeling on Ling Xiayou has been destroying so many tournaments forever, but also watching your Reds play from Kuwait. The specialists with this character create a nightmare to fight against in a first to two. She's basically impossible to hit on immediate timing. You can assume they're going to do an AOP setup. So you give up your turn, which allows her to keep running her game plan. Now, she is pretty technical. You do need to know matchup specific things to succeed with Ling. But once you have mastered those, she is really, really difficult to hit. She now has insane offense in the heat state. If a stage enables her to get the wall or the floor break really easily, she can really delete your health and put you in a guess situation very quickly. If you're confused about how to do that, watch any Peeling set. People who have fought Peeling for ages and start to know his setups are still having trouble dealing with this character. All right, King. We have a whole podcast episode on King. And at that time, our list was a bit different. And I think King has some clear gaping... Well, I don't want to say gaping. He has some clear weaknesses compared again to the top 10, but he still stands so strong. We've seen consistent tournament results from the John, both in exhibition and in bracket-style tournaments. The muscle armor just creates a nightmare problem for like these long-range characters who want to use moves from a distance. And when you're fighting with him up close, the down forward 2-1 is a safe counter hit confirmable mid-launcher, right? 13 frames. He has the shove. He has other power crushes in case you're playing string mind games with his muscle armor. King is so strong, and when you add the robbery factor of a truly hidden giant swing into the wall versus Shining Wizard, or the chain throws, or just a generic command throw like his Muscle Buster, he's a very difficult character to deal with. His heat smash is insanely strong. So, King, likely where a lot of players fail. If you want a summary of the podcast, we found a lot of King players probably struggle because they want to do all the throws all the time. But if you are poking mid with King more, threatening string extensions and a ton of other moves, and doing muscle armor, you end up succeeding probably more than just spamming his throws. Okay, we're almost done with top 15. These are characters that I feel stand above the others in their power bracket. Paul and Clive. Paul is a tough one. Most people struggle, I think, to succeed with Paul in the intermediate advanced level. But the players who you see specialize in Paul really make him shine. Glaciating, Justice, MD, Luffy are the top 3 I can think of. This character is a menace, and because he stays so under the radar, they keep buffing him. Deep Dive 4 is like a minus 12 low that can go across the screen. His down forward 1 can loop into a mind game situation where he can truly counter everything you can do, right? If you mash a jab or a high string, he can high crush with his back sway 3. If you mash a slower button, back sway 4 is a counter hit launcher. It's up to the Paul player to wield these options well, but when he does it, he is truly a menace. So I think Paul's power level is only going to go up, especially if they continue to buff him. Forward 2? What is that move? It's ridiculous. Now, it's different from, say, Clive. Clive, I think, has the benefit of being a booster character. Now, I don't say that derogatorily. I mean that Clive's toolkit takes care of a lot of the concerns for you as a Tekken player. 1+2 being a 13 frame safe mid is a huge privilege. And because he has parries and a better sidestep than most of the cast, it's difficult to try to commit to hitting him. If he throws out a down forward 2, if he throws out a 1+2 and heat engages, if he throws out a forward 3 orbital and launches you and he goes into heat state, his heat mode is so good he can basically end the round, right? He either gets guard break mix-ups, guard break into wall splat. He has huge damage with his heat strings. What else does he have? He has multiple strings that go into stance. He's a very difficult character to deal with once he's in heat, and his ability to access heat is so good. Trying to hit Clive is usually unproductive. It ends up playing out like a Tekken 7 matchup, where, say, against Xiayou, you don't want to force offense, you just want to poke her here and there and let them make a mistake. I think Clive is a similar archetype of character, even though it manifests in very different ways. The anti-Clive strategy ends up looking pretty similar to, say, anti-Alisa or anti-Ling. Clive is really strong. Clive is really, really strong. And that wraps up our top 15. We have our top 5, which I believe stand head and shoulders above the rest. And then the top 15 here, 10 characters here, who are still extremely egregious. They're committing war crimes in the battlefield. But there are either skill requirements, say playing Paul. There's Feng, who requires a lot of interactions. There's Shaheen and Law, which are very forward-moving characters, which doesn't stylistically work for everyone. Same with Bryan being a defensive character, demanding decent defense and control, but a lot of reward when he does succeed. Let's look at the top 28. This was the most fun part of the list for me to make. It's going to make people the most upset, I think, because it is ordered. But I think it leads to the most interesting discussion. Reina. I think Reina may overtake Jin as one of the most downplayed characters of all time, if not next to King. Reina feels like she was built to answer every Mishima player's frustration for the past 7 Tekkens, right? You think about a Mishima, think of like a traditional Kazuya from before Tekken 8. I have trouble approaching people from a distance and making them respect my mix-up, my hell sweep or my mid. Reina got forward 2. A long-range 12-frame mid that forces a mix-up. Oh, I'm playing Kazuya. I'm having trouble poking people. Reina has down forward 1-2 like Heihachi and down forward 1-1, right? She has a flash punch string like Heihachi. She now has the high, and when you include her electric, she has this high and mid game that reminds us of Heihachi. But her hell sweep is a power low in a similar taste to, say, like Devil Jin doing CD4-4. It's not a knockdown, but it chunks and leads to an advantageous situation. Giving Reina stances off of this also allows her to have some preset offense that doesn't require a lot of precise timing with, say, another electric, another hell sweep, a realign thing. She has homing moves out of stance. She has homing grabs out of stance. They have allowed this Mishima to have cover-ups to the weaknesses that the Mishima archetype has had in the past. Reina is an exceptionally strong character. Her hurt box is so difficult to hit. Sidestep electric can dodge a Steve 1-2-1, which is supposed to be the big stop sign move. High counter hit string, right? I do think the nerf to her full crouch down forward 4 was weird. I get it because a lot of players were doing it just at round start, but it makes her crouching punishment really weird, especially if you're reading highs. You have to use full crouch down forward 3 or time better. I'm curious how they'll address that. I feel like that change was really weird, even though I'm not exactly saying we should buff Reina. I think that's something to note. The reason why she sits below the top 15 is because, as we've seen in the pro circuit, the better you are at defending against Mishimas and against her stances, the harder it is for her to succeed. Yagami is quite literally the only person finding consistent success with her. Joka pulled her out at Boz Gauntlet earlier in the year. But Yagami's creativeness, representation of different threats, and in general, just his wielding of Reina's full moveset, I think, shows more of what her power can be. Right after that is Heihachi. This one is not a character I would have put here on my own. I had conversations with other high-level NA players, and we put Heihachi here. One of the obvious answers is Warrior Instinct. You get a God mode, permanent life deleter with enhanced, safe hell sweep, insane Demon's Breath. Just he becomes ridiculous in Warrior Instinct, and he gets it once per game if you're playing properly, right? So, ridiculous character. But also, in a 1-2 setting, his stance offense becomes a lot more threatening, like the unblockable at the wall, leading to a wall splat. He has a counter hit launching hell sweep. He has lots of things that, unless you're really used to fighting against that particular Heihachi player, it can be difficult to deal with. He could just choose to randomly spam parry, end up in heat, and just start mixing you, right? So Heihachi, hard to say he's a consistent character, but in the 1-2 setting, he gets toxic. And this top 28 will start to feel like that a lot. I've put Lili right here. And I had trouble placing Lili because I think Lili is really, really strong, even though I personally don't feel I use her to her potential. I think she has... We literally joke about having Lili rounds, where sometimes she'll just pop off, heat engage, feisty rabbit mix you, hit you to the wall, and mix you up twice and you die, right? Sometimes you just have a Lili round. She has the robbery factor. She has the insane movement. She presents a stop sign to the opponent if they're not careful, right? It's very difficult for somebody to, say, take Dragunov and try to run Lili over. We've seen it happen before. Atif against Dojin. Dojin not being a super locked-in Lili main, but attempting the Lili play for EWC, and it did not go his way because I think even though Lili has all these really, really insane traits and properties, she can be confusing to wield sometimes. I want to have a podcast with Lili experts to try and break down why this is the case. Lili players do so much downplay, but I personally think the character is so strong, and I want to figure out why. So look forward to that. After Lili, I have put Asuka. Asuka is the subject to some of the highest downplay I have ever seen, in addition to Reina, Jin, and King. But Asuka in this game reminds me of fighting Steve in Tekken 7. Trying to hit her without dying is your entire job. However, in this game, they've also given her advancing plus frame moves with chip, still really good pokes. Her strings are getting a lot scarier, like her 1-1-3 being delayable and having a counter hit property, down back 1 going under things, obviously can and launching Sabaki. Asuka is very, very scary to attack into and is getting better and better at attacking every single time they buff her. So it's hard for me to consistently place her below this position. And as we fill out more characters, maybe it'll be more clear. I have Victor next. Victor, I think, is shoehorned into this style of high randomness. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We've seen Farzine succeed with him. We've seen Ao succeed with him. But it feels like he lives on the knife's edge. He has to play somewhat unsafe to be scary. And understanding what your opponent is kind of threatened by and slowly answering those while continuing to stay random is what makes him strong. And I think that's why Farzine and Ao really succeed with him. They're not afraid to take the risk of doing a down back 4 that's launch punishable or the low sweep from stance. They'll do it because they think it's going to hit. And when you start looking for it, they'll hit you with everything else. The reason why I haven't put Victor any higher is because I think, especially in matchups like Bryan or Clive, who are already playing defensively into you, he's going punch for punch with weaker pokes. He needs to land a counter hit, and these other characters have better ways to push the advantage. And that's why he's so much lower. And in general, we're going to start, like I said, we're going to start running into matchup spread issues that will determine the rest of the tiers. Jun Kazama. I wanted to put her higher personally, but I think that's my bias because my characters struggle against her. Lili, fighting against Jun, doesn't get free access to her back turn mix-ups because of the threat of Can. So her offense is naturally neutered. Steve gets punch parried really easily by her and gets launched. You also can't really move around her pokes, even with Lili's better movement and Steve's weaves, because her pokes have so much tracking. So Jun forces you to play really slow because her pokes you can't move around them. And randomly, it could be a big plus frame mid with like sidestep 4. It could be a nuke with Can. She could do a high evasive forward 2 that launches you. And she can make it safe by spending some HP. I think Jun is kind of a menace, especially with her counter hit low game, her really good punishment. I honestly, if it were my list, I initially had these characters up here, top of top 28. But other people checked me. They said they seem a little high. But again, when you get to this level, the power levels are so close, it really comes down to matchup spread. And I think Jun and Asuka have really good matchup spreads, with a few exceptions, like, say, Bryan with his elbows and knees. Right? Let's keep it moving. Kazuya. I wanted to put Kazuya higher. If you look at Edge's list here, you can see Edge has Kazuya at the top of his A tier, right after the top, like near top 20. And Arslan Ash as well. Actually, Arslan has Kazuya lower. So I'll show these lists a few more times. You can look at them later. But I put Kazuya here. I think Kazuya fails with regard to the ease of use and matchup spread cases. He has an insane mix-up game. He has an electric. They gave him a demon paw. They gave him a plus frame crouch dash mid that helps automatically change the timing between his crouch dash offense. 1+4, the devil power crush that is a tornado launcher and hits grounded is really insanely strong. But I put him lower because of difficulty of use. Even the best Kazuyas in the world are dropping their combos, and that makes a difference in a first to two. You also have the idea of that imposing his stop sign, the electric, the down forward 2, sidestep electric, whatever defense you want to apply, is just harder to apply than defense on Asuka, Lili, Reina, etc. Right? So I think Kazuya, his ceiling is higher. He could reasonably be up here at the pro level, but we're just not seeing it yet. And I think part of that is he's just a more difficult character to pull off. As much as I hate to say it, he is a technical character. He's game plan, maybe not that difficult, but he demands a lot mechanically and consistently in order to succeed. So I have him down here, but again, these power levels are very, very close. All right, Steve. I have Steve here. Steve could debatably go above Kazuya, but the reason I have Steve so low is matchup issues. If Steve did not have his matchup issues, I think he could belong up here, if not higher. But currently, if you put Steve against Alisa, Ling, Zafina, Asuka, Lili, Reina is feeling a bit better lately. I've been practicing a lot against Reina. Clive, Paul, Bryan. And I know the Bryan one's going to raise some eyebrows. I think Bryan in this game has become much more difficult to Steve, especially with QCB1. In any case, Steve is so good until he's not. And in those hard matchups, he has to work pretty hard with very low reward and resetting to neutral a lot. Down 2-1 becomes his key poke. It gives up a lot of pressure. And this is not my effort to downplay. Again, I think Lili is insanely good. But when it comes to Steve, the limited matchup spread is a real problem. I'm concerned that they'll overbuff him in Season 2. I actually really like where Steve is at power-wise. I would just hope that they give him some better tools for answering the really evasive matchups like Alisa, Ling, Zafina. But I have a hunch they're going to overbuff him. I have no concrete evidence for that. Hwoarang. Hwoarang has been placed really, really high in other tier lists. Arslan Ash notably has him and Steve in the A+ tier. And Edge has placed Hwoarang really high as well. Let me zoom in a bit. In the A+ tier himself. He has Steve notably lower. Hwoarang has gotten really good in this game. He has the new counter hit strings from Heat. He has this right foot forward, down forward 3, the like jumping homing move that's +1. In general, he has just gotten way scarier than before. I might even put him above Steve. Initially, I didn't. But I don't know Hwoarang's matchup spread very well. I just know that, especially we saw it in the Pakistani matchups, if you have any kind of knowledge gap over your opponent, it pays off a lot. And Hwoarang against the Pakistani players, where they have less Hwoarang experience, really, really cashed out in the Tekken World Tour. So I think Steve and Hwoarang can go either way. Steve is probably easier to pilot at a high level, but both characters are very, very strong. I can't really decide who. I might put Steve just because we've been figuring, like, I feel more comfortable commenting on Steve's strength, but these could really go either way. To be honest, this whole top 28, you could really flex people in any direction depending on your experience and your personal biases. Okay, Zafina. I wanted to put Zafina higher as well, but we really only see Shadow and Chanel playing her, as far as I know. I think that she's going to be insanely buffed in Season 2 as well. They keep giving her these high coverage moves. I think the main thing that's difficult for Zafina right now is if you are oppressing her with, say, a top 5 or top 10 character, she struggles to get started, to get into stance, to get things going, unless she commits to a power crush or like a sidestep down forward 2 or something. Once she's going, she's really scary. Like her running moves, everything is plus into stance, 1-4 into stance. She has insane properties once she gets going, but prior to that, it feels like she struggles to get things started. That may change in the future. All right, and then the last 3, Lee, Eddy, and Lidia. I put that backwards. Eddy and Lidia. Let's start with the bottom 2, Eddy and Lidia. These characters are pretty weak. They have pretty clear flaws, but in a first to 2, they're very toxic. They have very high reward casino mix-ups that you really cannot afford to be wrong on very many times. Eddy, especially with like the wall breaking, the wall splatting handstand throw, his ability to handstand transition into relax and be really evasive. He gets a lot of reward and can cash out quickly when you don't have a lot of time to collect data in a first to 2. Lidia is quite similar. Very flawed character. They designed her to have difficulty tracking unless she commits to her launch punishable low. She has really, really good combo damage and punishment, but again, kind of dependent on out casinoing your opponent. Obviously, there's room for outplay, but in general, quite difficult. You see a lot of tournament Lidia players using the mid from Heaven and Earth just because risking their life for the high never feels good, you know? Finally, we have Lee. Lee, debatably, could be much higher. I think Lee has some clear flaws right now that, if patched, could become quickly disgusting. So Lee, really strong poke character, has counter hits and evasion on so many of his moves. What is holding Lee back? His heat state doesn't offer very much. His slide leaves him standing and doesn't knock down. those two things are actually, I think, a really big deal. When Lee goes into heat, he doesn't really change as a character. He just gets the heat smash low, which is nice for some hazard stages. And the fact his slide doesn't knock down and lets you get a full launch punish on him, not a float punish like these slide characters, is a big liability. So Lee players will generally not want to go low. They'll instead try to harass you and try to find their big counter hits, right? If you really turtle up against Lee, he has to risk his life over and over and over again in a way that Law and Shaheen don't really have to. So Lee is one buff away from shooting really high up. Because of how hard it is to hit him. He's an insanely evasive counter hit character. In Europe, they actually place Lee much higher, and I think it's because they're a really mashy region. So Lee ends up being really successful in that area. But in NA, where people tend to be a bit more passive, maybe look for robbery, try to play more consistent, Shadow 20Z famous for treating lows like chip damage, Lee loses a lot of effectiveness. And that rounds out our list. We don't have a place to put Anna yet. I have no way of guessing how strong she'll be, so I'm not going to do that. But this is my tier list for Season 1. To recap, top 5 has a clear power advantage over the rest of the cast. Almost no matchup problems. I can't even say they have matchup problems. I think Yoshi players will complain about ranged matchups like, say, Bryan or maybe Victor, or Hwoarang has some frame traps there and things like that. Steve can be annoying, but I don't think Yoshi really has matchup problems. Nina can really do a bit of everything. She has a really evasive sidestep right, counter hit strings. Jin is getting nerfed, so you guys don't even talk to me in the comments about Jin, bro. It's over. We'll go into Season 2. And then again, top 15 is very close. They're very, very close. It's just like if you had to pick one flaw, then maybe it sticks out. Feng needs a lot of interactions. I hate that. I hate that cope, by the way. But I'm going to be real. There is some truth to it. I hate saying it, but Feng really does need to win more interactions than, say, Yoshimitsu, Nina, or Jin do, right? Bryan does require some defense. He is a pretty technical character. Claudio, limited move list. Alisa, if both players are playing small, she can struggle to find big opportunities. Paul's demanding. You know, every character, as you go down, starts to have more weaknesses. But truly, the power levels, very, very close. And especially when you get to top 28, you could make an argument for any of these characters moving up. People could put Lili here. Some people have Lili up here in the top 15. And especially if you have a strong killer in your region. Like, I watched Usama on June. His June makes me want to put her up here. But you know, we have to consider things outside of my own biases. Let's look at the other pro players tier list. So I'm going to switch screens here because you don't really need to see the notepad anymore. So this is my tier list. Let's look at Arslan Ashes right next to ours, okay? So perhaps there's a better way to do this. If I shrink it like this, cool. Let's look at Arslan Ash's tier list and compare. So top 5 actually looks similar. Instead of Kuma, he has Feng Wei. Perhaps Pakistan's style is better equipped to dealing with Kuma. Maybe their matchups feel more comfortable against him. But I personally think Kuma is a demon in a first to 2. As you can see, the rest of it is pretty close. Biggest difference comes around where... did he put Clive in this list? How old is this list? November 10th. So this is before Clive came out. We see that Paul is notably missing from the top 15 spot. We see no Clive, obviously, because it wasn't out yet. But Alisa, Claudio, Shaheen, Bryan, Law, King, those are similar. Victor probably because of Farzine. Hwoarang probably because of Edge and Speed Kicks, who I saw Arslan fight. And then Steve because of Numan. I think these are reasonable. Again, I pitch the matchup spread issue when I look at Steve and Hwoarang specifically. The rest, though, you see Arslan values Zafina a little higher, and I can agree with that. I think Zafina can be a menace. Reina and Lili look similar. He has Asuka in trash tier. I think part of that is there are not really players piloting Asuka like King Ray Jr. does. I think most Asuka players play her in a very different way that is probably less optimal. Additionally, the Pakistanis can react to down 1+2, so they probably don't feel threatened by her when they can just use their default defense. But I think that Asuka is being slept on, and I think she may be very overbuffed going into Season 2. Yeah, so that's Arslan's list. Let's look at Edge's list. Edge's list is pretty cool. So top 5, Yoshimitsu's missing, but he puts in Kuma and Bryan. They have knee and low high. And to be clear, Edge said his tier list is not ordered, and he says that He rates them highly because of Bryan's specialist and not tournament results, but just how he feels about the character, right? So when you have Ni and Lohai in your region, Bryan is going to be top. When you have Rangchu, Kuma is going to be top. Ulsan, Dragunov is going to be top, right? Infested's known for Nina, and Jin, CBM, right? What else is similar? We note that Lee is in the top 10 for his list. He explains that here. I will scroll down. High spec punishment move, 10 frame while standing 14 frame, right? High spec mid heat engager, forward 3. Good lows with down 3 and back 3. I think his moveset is top tier. Yeah, he's just missing the heat and the slide. But I really do agree that Lee is on the precipice. Heihachi is much higher than in my list. I would like to hear his explanation for that. I do know that really, really good players, especially those who can place their electrics really well, just make Heihachi really scary. Which sounds a little obvious, but I think it's worth to know. And then again, Kazuya and Leroy really high because of Breadman and presumably Boa Love and maybe other Kazuya. I know Lohai plays Kazuya as well. And then the rest looks similar with Asuka again being at the bottom. So I'm okay if the Asuka fans come and flame me. I get it. Your character's probably getting buffed in Season 2 anyways, but I insist that this character is much stronger than people think. You have to respect that people are afraid to attack into you and take advantage of that. That's what King Ray Jr. does really well. Yeah, I think that wraps up most of the tier list I've looked at. He puts Clive in A tier. I think Clive and Ling are criminally low in his list. But that's what I'm saying. Lists are a matter of opinion. We have P-Ling, and in Korea, the only Ling player I know is like Sodam. So I think that we are all subject to our regional biases. We are all making judgments based on our own experiences and our own matchups. So this is my list. The purpose of this is not to make you feel bad for playing a certain character. The purpose is not to make you feel good for playing a certain character. It's to provide a reference of strength for when we evaluate how Season 2 is balancing the characters. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with my list? Do you think this list is paid by Bandai Namco? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate the support. I hope Season 2 turns out really great. I hope that we end up having a lot of fun with it. It could really go either way. And not from a balance perspective, but from a design perspective, right? They could make Steve bottom tier, but if he's fun to play, I'll still play him. They could make Lili bottom tier. If she's fun to play, I'll still play him. So I hope that the changes are stuff we can look forward to. And please look forward to the rest of my content coming in Season 2. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.